Hello, and welcome to the Berggruen Institute's event, Building Cooperative Ownership in the Digital Economy, What Can Policy Do? I'm proud to present a conversation today with our fellow Trebor Scholz and his co-authors in cooperation with our partner, the Platform Cooperativism Consortium, on approaching the problem of the platform economy and its negative consequences. Well, since 2008, we have seen a proliferation of new platform mechanisms for distributing labor. What are platforms? Platforms are, in their simplest, a type of labor matching operation. They allow workers to enter to theoretically enter and their requirements for work, and people who need work to hire those workers. That's the promise. The reality has been very different. The proliferation of platform mechanisms has allowed for the obfuscation of workers' rights. It has allowed for the weakening of solidarity and the rollback of protections we have all enjoyed. However, some people and some services have truly benefited from platforms due to their flexibility and the ability to move people as they are needed and shape workers' hours as workers would like them. How do we get past this? We clearly can't put the genie back in the bottle. So we need a variety of strategies to move through the problem of platform economies. One solution that has had a lot of potential is the creation of platform cooperatives. These are platforms, they're labor matching mechanisms, but they're owned not by private firms, but by the workers themselves and other stakeholders in their community. Trebor Scholz and his colleagues have created a report for us that outlines what policymakers can do to enable these new entities. And what we are really proud of is that we're not just looking at a national level for solutions. National solutions take a very long time, and there are still many unanswered questions as to how to tame this monster. Our authors have focused on subnational solutions in order to experiment and respond quickly to the problems that the platform economy has created. I'm very proud to introduce Leila Hashan, my program manager at the Berggruen Institute's Future of Capitalism program, who will be leading our discussion today and introducing both our presenters and respondents. Leila, thank you.
Yaakov, thanks for the introduction. Welcome everyone, and thank you for attending our panel today. My name is Leila Hashan, and I'm thrilled today to introduce you to our respondents. Joining us from Northern California is Hilary Abell. She's the co-founder and Chief Policy and Impact Officer at Project Equity. I would also like to introduce Councillor Matthew Brown, who's joining us from the UK. He's the leader of the Preston City Council. And finally, I would like to introduce everyone to Dr. P.V. Unnikrishnan, who is joining us from India. Dr. Unnikrishnan is the member secretary for the Kerala Development Innovation Strategic Council. I would also like to introduce Trebor Scholz, who's an activist and scholar at the New School and Berggruen Fellow, who will now shortly introduce his co-authors to us. Trebor, take it away.
Zoom classic. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon. And so in the next 10 minutes or so, I want to give you a little bit of background information and highlight a few key points from our policy report, also introduce my co-authors, as Leila just said. And before we hear from our three remarkable respondents. We will share the final version of the report with you after this event, so you can see the link to that later. So before we dig into the report, I just want to convey my gratitude, of course, to the Berggruen Institute in Los Angeles, particularly Niels Gilman and Jakob Fegen and Nicholas Berggruen and also Leila Lorenzo for their continued support of this work and also our work together over the past year. Really their enthusiastic and warm receptions of my efforts has been really uplifting and motivating at a time that really wasn't so easy otherwise, right? I also would like to thank my co-authors who are all policy experts in some capacity. Many years ago, I will never forget Hal Plotkin, who is a former member of the Obama administration, stood in front of me and pledged that he would wholeheartedly commit himself to promoting our work. And I will never forget that moment. And he kept his word. He offered all of his policy expertise to our efforts, starting with the policy brief that we wrote together for Senator Gillibrand a few years ago. This actually included in our policy report in Appendix 3 on page 71. Prior to our collaboration, Jonas Pensian, who's here as well, my other co-author, participated as a fellow in our Institute for the Cooperative Digital Economy at the New School, where he undertook an ambitious comparative policy study of platform co-ops in 3 countries. We are sharing a link to his paper as well towards the end of this event. That leaves me with Morshed Manan, who has done extensive research on platform co-op, very wide-ranging. And that also includes a paper on the role of platform co-ops at the base of the pyramid in the Global South. And we are also sharing that towards the end. Okay, so now let's talk a bit about this policy report. I think all of us here I think we will all share the sentiment that came out from a comment by Juliet Schor, an American sociologist with whom I spoke at a Berggruen event a few months ago. And I think this could really be the tagline for this event. She underscored, and I quote, that if we are going to win, we are going to need to have the state on our side. So I say it again, if we are going to win, we are going to need to have the state on our side. So that, of course, in an American context, makes me think of the Rural Electrification Act of 1936, right? It's a case in point. It was like one of President Franklin Roosevelt's many New Deal programs to confront the Great Depression in the United States. And we see and we learned that co-ops really thrive in sectors and territories that have regulatory backing. And so we've discovered that, right, over the past 175 years of co-op history. And that's not only true in the United States, but also in Kerala, as evidenced by the worker cooperative ULCCS, which has been a great success in Kerala and became one of the largest construction companies in Asia. So I think that all of us here today agree that regulatory frameworks are really critical to any business model, right? And its scalability, right? So, all right, so a bit of background. First of all, if you're not exactly sure what platform co-ops are, well, we have a working definition for you. I think Jakob Fegen, Dr. Fegen also already introduced that a little bit, but just as a short repeat, platform cooperatives are businesses that use a website, mobile app, or protocol to sell goods or services. They rely on democratic decision-making and shared ownership of the platform by workers and other stakeholders of the platform. Right. So, and if you want to dig in a little bit more, you can take 12 minutes out of your day and watch my TED Talk on this topic. And we will drop the link for this also in the chat after. So today there are roughly 500 of these businesses in over 40 countries. And you may ask yourself, like, why did we need another policy report? Why did these guys sit together and work for this for a very long time? And the reason is that numerous city councils approached the Platform Co-op Consortium at the New School asking how they could implement this model in their city, from San Francisco to Melbourne, in a practical way, really. Frequently asking how they can do this while also experiencing budget cuts. So the city of San Francisco has just cut 41 bus lines and still wants to introduce this at the same time. So how would they do that, right? So this was really the impetus for writing this report, to help these municipalities and federal governments as well. And so that's why I initially pitched the idea to the Berggruen Institute and then invited our co-authors. There's a bit of a history that we have with policymakers that goes a few years back. I should mention this briefly. So I presented the work by the Platform Co-op Consortium at the G7 in Torino, and the Italian Parliament's Innovation Committee, as well as the German Social Democratic Party in Germany, which under Andrea Nahles declared platform co-ops as one of the party's core tenets for the party's digital directives. We worked with the British Labour Party, which included platform co-ops under its previous leadership, and now also under that of Keir Starmer. And last but not least, I delivered a talk on platform co-ops to the Kerala Legislative Assembly in India, where the state's planning committee has now included the adoption of a substantial number of platform co-ops in their 5-year plan. So what we can see is from Kerala to Europe, particularly the city of Preston in the UK, to New Zealand, Finland, and part of the United States, regulator and policymakers are becoming more open to accepting and facilitating cooperative ownership in the digital economy. So in our report, the policy suggestions that you will find are the result of rigorous case studies that we conducted on government policies, how they position themselves towards platform co-ops and their effect in the following localities. We looked at California in the United States, at Kerala, at Barcelona in Spain, at Bologna in Italy. For example, the city of Bologna gathered stakeholders from all around the city to evaluate their requirements, their needs, and then promote the creation of a synergistic platform co-op, really quite unique. We looked at Berlin, Germany, we looked at Paris, France, and we looked at Preston. So what exactly can policymakers do? So here are just a few excerpts from our report to get us going. We started, of course, with procurements, right? So we can mandate government procurement policies that favor worker-owned platform cooperatives. We are strongly in favor and propose solidarity-oriented loan programs, so public solidarity lending to finance early-stage platform co-ops as part of national, regional, and municipal development strategies. We suggest to fund legal research and to evaluate and ensure that laws governing cooperative enterprises are updated to reflect the changing realities of digital technologies. And we suggest to recognize platform co-ops publicly. This could be through awards or in other ways, right, to make them visible and to highlight successful projects. To create a system of public benefits for platform co-op workers, including healthcare, childcare, and worker training. And to create a network of public venues that can be used deliberately as hubs for platform co-ops, right? So physical space is a big issue. As well, we see with many platform co-ops, or several at least, that unions have come forward and provided their locales as offices for platform co-op. And then we've seen many platform co-op incubators emerge in cities such as Brussels, but also other development agencies. And we see that as something that municipalities should put forward to set up specifically incubators for platform co-op. And lastly, and perhaps a bit controversially, we suggest direct public ownership of non-controlling co-op shares, especially on the municipal level, to provide a public voice in cooperative management and allowing for public voice, especially in multi-stakeholder cooperatives. Right? So I think there I should really emphasize again, so that this is non-controlling co-op shares of municipalities, right, in cooperatives. And there's a difference because there's a very checkered history, of course, of co-op history in relation to state ownership or, in role that can be too big. We saw this with, the colonial history of cooperatives in South Africa, but also in India or in Hong Kong, right, or in socialist republics, where the state has played a very checkered role, right? So I think there's an important distinction to be made to what we are proposing. And then, of course, to include platform co-ops in political manifestos, as we saw it already with the Labour Party. Right? And I want to add one point, which I think is important, which we didn't include in the report, but I think it's important that specifically in the United States, which is the urgent need for a uniform co-op incorporation option across the different United States federal states, right? US federal states. So in conclusion, and to sort of wrap this up, I want to say that platform co-ops, of course, require municipal and federal support if they are to provide essential services. Community-owned platforms are unlikely to gain traction unless and until limits are imposed to prevent better capitalized competitors who are not constrained by community responsibility. Right? So to put those in check, I think is also part of shaping regulation. And carefully crafted policy can help to make co-ops more appealing and accessible. And it's a comprehensive cooperative policy agenda that should really include laws on taxation, procurement, labor, securities, and competition, in addition to cooperative labor law. So coming back to Juliet Shore, I think we can still say that if we are going to win, we are going to need to have the state on our side. Yeah, I think that is very true. But I think I want to end just with this one example of the SEBA Federation in India, which is a federation of over 300,000 self-employed poor women. That is a cooperative federation. And because in moments when the state, the safety nets of the state or the market fall short of the needs of people, when those needs are not met, right? Cooperatives come through before this policy kicks in, right? And you see this with the SEBA Federation, which in a recent survey of all of these workers in the federation, in these co-ops, 71% of the workers said that they would not have survived the pandemic without the federation, right? So you see the really important role of cooperatives, and we see how important it is that municipalities and federal government set legislation in a way that supports them. Thanks. So that was a little introduction, and hopefully highlighting some of the point and making you curious about wanting to read this rather long report. As Jakob would attest, Jakob would always say, like, that's not a policy paper, that's not a white paper, that's a report. That's like way too long. But anyway, we couldn't stop ourselves. I hope it will be useful. And yeah, I want to add and maybe hand over to Jonas and Morshid, and maybe to highlight their particular emphasis, because you authored the section on Preston, right? Maybe you want to say a bit about the importance of Preston to what we took from Preston as an example. Marshall, Jonas?
Yes, so thank you very much for the opportunity to speak as a co-author on this report, and thank you all of you for this opportunity. In the interest of time, I'll just focus on what we discussed with respect to Preston in our report, and we don't want to be too presumptuous when we are speaking, given the presence of Councillor Matthew Brown at this particular webinar, as he, of course, is the person best positioned to speak about this. But what we emphasized in the report is that there is a lot to learn by other municipalities around the world, as well as potentially national governments that draft public procurement law, on how to use public procurement regulations to support cooperatives while still being aware about other legislation such as competition law. And there is a lot to learn from the experience of Preston in this respect, as well as, aside from the regulatory aspect of it, so thinking about how to introduce social value requirements in evaluating a bid, how employee-owned firms can be brought into considering social value requirements. Then beyond that, we need to also think, how can we mobilize anchor institutions, as they're known in Preston, to be able to use these policies. So anchor institutions refer to local universities, local public authorities, hospitals that are owned by the NHS, for instance. And this, we feel, could be applicable in context beyond just Preston as well. And I'm sure we will hear more about this later. Trebor mentioned co-op incubators briefly, and Preston also has a Preston Cooperative Development Network. And these sorts of ecosystem institutions at the local level or at the national level, such as Cooperatives UK, has an essential role in supporting cooperative entrepreneurs and municipalities to build platform cooperatives. And on this point, I'll hand over to Jonas to talk more about this.
Yeah, thanks so much, Moshe. Welcome everyone from Berlin, Germany. I think this example of Preston in the UK, and specifically Co-ops UK and the Unfound program that they founded, really shows that ecosystem institutions, they play an essential role in fostering platform co-ops. And such ecosystem institutions, they are emerging in more and more countries. In France, the working group Platform Cooperativism has emerged in 2017, for example, and it brings together a variety of platforms that all commit to what they call the Common Platforms Charters principle. And that includes inclusive governance, data ethics, production of commons, etc. In Germany, Platform Cooperatives Germany has supported the founding process of platform co-ops such as Cora. And more concretely, they have organized workshops which bring together co-op entrepreneurs, workers, activists, scholars, and legal experts. And aim here really is to develop blueprints for how to found and how to run platform co-ops. Similarly, in Poland, the Co-op Tech Hub has been created recently in order to help incubate platform co-ops, but also, and important for our project here, to provide tech products and services to local governments, to cultural institutions, to NGOs, etc., to everyone who is interested in fostering cooperativism in the digital realm. So in sum, what we show in our report is that these ecosystem institutions, that they provide valuable services to platform co-ops. And these services include seed funding, legal counseling, network opportunities, and much more. And so from a policy perspective, which really was the main thing that we tried to do with our report, it is really essential that policymakers on all these different levels, so local, municipal, national, that they provide direct support to these ecosystem institutions, as they provide a really important bridge between the platform co-ops on the ground and the government from a top-down perspective. So that's it from my side, and I hand back over.
Thank you, Trebor, Morshid, and Jonas. I would now like to give the floor to Hilary Abell to respond to the paper and the comments just made. Hilary, take it away.
Good morning, everybody. It's morning here in California, where I'm based. So nice to be with you. My thanks to the Berggruen Institute and to all the authors of the paper, and the commenters for the great work that's going on around the world. I'm really delighted to be here to get this international perspective this morning. So I'm going to share some comments on what's happening currently in California to complement what's been presented in the paper. and then make a few comments on co-op policy in general, as well as some observations about platform cooperatives and how their greatest strengths, the use of technology, can also be a way to potentially address what could be some of their weaknesses as cooperatives, meaning the dispersed nature of the membership when they're engaging with each other or with their customers on a platform. So my background actually is in worker cooperatives. I spent a good part of the last 30 years either as a worker owner in a worker co-op, as a cooperative developer, and also as an advocate. And I've never seen opportunity like we have now. So I'm really delighted that this paper is coming forward and that platform cooperatives are starting to take off with some really successful initiatives that were written about in the paper. I'm based here in the San Francisco Bay Area. My organization, Project Equity, has its home here in Oakland. But we do work around the United States, primarily on employee ownership, broad-based employee ownership in all of its forms. First and foremost, worker cooperatives. And we transition small and medium-sized enterprises to cooperatives, which is one way that governments at all levels can help to introduce government programs, economic development programs, and policies that support cooperatives through transitions of successful businesses. In the platform space, of course, that's not usually how it happens. And it's really wonderful to see so much startup activity and the recommendations around incubators and other ways to strengthen startup activity in the platform space. An overall message I want to share before I dive into a little detail on what's happening in California is that, here in the United States, of course, we're using the term build back better quite a bit, coming from the administration, but it really does express what I think many of us, all of us who care about social justice and economic justice have been envisioning since COVID hit. So, prior to the election last fall, many of us started mobilizing around cooperative policy right when the pandemic hit. Here, the city of San Francisco was the first to actually close down. Well, actually, many of the Bay Area cities did it simultaneously to close down businesses in light of COVID. And my organization was one of about 8 that co-founded a policy coalition at that time called Worker Owned Recovery California. And we're going strong. And one of the messages we are bringing in California and throughout the US and an increasing number of policy conversations that we're now engaging in is that what better way to build back better, to build a more socially just and inclusive economy than to use well-proven but underutilized models. And cooperatives are such a model, and platform cooperatives are, of course, a newer expression of that because they're in a newer part of our economy, but they are very much a proven model that has been underappreciated and underutilized in the United States. I think less so in other places and less so in some sectors, like as Trebor mentioned, in rural electrification, cooperatives have been a huge factor. Here in California, as the paper mentions, we do have a long history with cooperatives. And today, about 20% of the worker co-ops in the United States are in California. It's still a modest number, though. We have an estimated 100 worker co-ops here in California. So we have a huge opportunity with such a large economy and a small base of actual worker cooperatives to build on and an even smaller one of platform cooperatives. But we do have a strong advocacy base as well. So many of the national organizations in the United States are based in California and really dedicated to building up a cooperative economy here. Their co-ops are starting to get public support for the first time in my lifetime that I've been aware of anyway. For example, Project Equity is working with 7 local governments in California in partnerships to promote employee ownership and as a way to retain good local small businesses that may not have succession plans, may be extremely burdened by the crisis that has been the COVID pandemic, but have good bones, if you will, and can continue to provide good jobs and make major contributions to our local economies. So we have gotten a lot of traction with local governments in promoting cooperative conversions as a way to maintain local businesses. Platform cooperatives are newer in California, and the paper talks a bit about Nurses Can, which is a small proof of concept project where one single classification of healthcare workers, licensed vocational nurses, were, using a platform, came together to be matched with clients through the platform. And that was a successful pilot that's still going at a very small level. But what I'd like to add to the conversation about California is that has already led to a much larger multi-classification healthcare worker staffing cooperative, a platform co-op as well, called Allied Up. And this launched in January of this year. It was started by the same organization that started Nurses Can, SEIU-UHW, which is a California-wide union with tens of thousands, somewhere between 100,000 and 150,000 workers across California. And they have launched Allied Up. It's now an independent cooperative, platform cooperative with, last time I talked to them a couple of months ago, about 50 workers working out in the field, but they are negotiating major contracts with large healthcare institutions in California and beyond. And their estimate is that they have the potential to grow very quickly because they are a platform cooperative. They are a staffing agency, not a traditional, more brick and mortar style worker cooperative. Which generally cannot scale as quickly as a staffing cooperative could. So they expect to be able to grow to 10,000 or more workers and worker owners within a few years. So I've been very excited to see the launch of Allied Up and the engagement of SEIU-UHW as a major union. Not only have they helped to launch these two cooperatives, but they've also introduced a bill with Lorena Gonzalez, a Southern California Assembly member, called AB 13, the Cooperative Economy Act. And it's currently in appropriations. It's a 2-year bill, and it'll move out of committee by the end of January. And it will set up more infrastructure to build more platform cooperatives. So that will hopefully be, if that can get passed, that will be a breakthrough, we hope, for platform cooperatives in California. As I mentioned, I really feel personally, as I know all of us do, that this is an excellent time to engage local, state, and federal governments in co-op policy. And I very much appreciate the emphasis on local governments. And I agree that that's where we've seen the most reception in the United States, for sure, over the last 10 years. And what our philosophy here at Project Equity around co-op policy is that a lot of the same policy mechanisms can work at the local, state, and federal level, but some will have much more impact at one or the other of those levels. And at the local level, I think what we need in the US most is for local governments to look at cooperative development as part of their vision for economic development, to legitimize it and to put it alongside other forms of economic development. We do have opportunities at the state level, I believe, that are really important. And our coalition, the Work Coalition, Worker-Owned Recovery California, will be introducing our 3rd budget request this year. We did our first one in COVID, had another one earlier this year, and we'll be introducing another. I know that it takes multiple times at bat, if you will, allow me to use the sports analogy, to get a home run when you're working on policy. We got traction. We've got a lot of legislators and agency staff in California interested in cooperatives. Haven't had a breakthrough yet, but we're going to be taking another pass at that this year, trying to get some funding for education and technical assistance, which would span all forms of cooperatives, including platform cooperatives. An interesting recent development, actually, is that the California Department of Labor did allocate $10 million over 3 years for funding for training programs and career ladders for multiple types of nurses, actually. And this, again, was achieved in large part by SEIU-UHW. And that initiative will include the development of a cooperative to employ many of those nurses. So there's a lot to look forward to here in California. Our coalition is welcoming new members from California, and we have a public call next week, which we do quarterly. So if you're interested in that, I'm happy to share my contact information via the Berggruen Institute. I'll move now to just a couple of general comments on co-op policy. We think of it in 2 ways, and I think these were well reflected in the examples given in the paper. The first is to remove barriers to cooperatives in existing law, existing government programs. And second is to encourage and incentivize cooperatives. And I believe that I wouldn't call it low-hanging fruit because it's surprisingly harder than one might think to remove these barriers because cooperatives, at least in the United States, I can't speak for other countries, but are so under-recognized and misunderstood. But often co-ops end up being excluded from programs, not because they are excluded by law, but because they're not explicitly included. So the organizations implementing those programs think that they're not eligible. We've seen that a number of times with some of the financing programs available through the state of California. And we're working with our California Infrastructure Bank and the organizations that administer their loan guarantee across the state of California to make it very clear that co-ops are not excluded from the loan guarantee programs that they have. And in fact, we're hoping that they will be explicitly included and encouraged through the upcoming application of the State Small Business Credit Initiative, which is a major, it's going to bring almost $1 billion of funding to California for small businesses. I was noticing the comments in the paper about how in several locations, the introduction of new legal forms or improvement of legal statutes around cooperatives has helped to spur their uptake. And I think that's a really interesting example of a barrier that could be removed, i.e. not having laws that are very suited to platform cooperatives or other forms of cooperatives. And I really encourage, I would love to see more research around, I think Germany was one example where the growth in cooperatives has been quite significant in the last 10 or so years. And there were two factors were mentioned. They're linking with other social goals. And we do see that a lot in co-ops in the US as well, and is a growing trend in business here as well. And the improvement of the laws. And I think there's a lot that could be done to improve legal statutes. But to be honest, I've been very torn about whether to focus there or to focus on things like getting good co-op development programs in place that can really help these co-ops work well, and raising awareness or creating tax incentives or other things like that. So I encourage more research on the policy side about what really are the drivers when we see increases in co-op development. And then in terms of encouraging and incentivizing co-ops, obviously there's a lot that can be done there. And in the United States, we know that we always have to keep in mind awareness raising and education, because not only are most people not aware of cooperatives in the US, even if they are members of co-ops, but they often have misconceptions like, oh, that's the buying club where people bought organic flour in my aunt's garage in the 70s. And that may have been a co-op and that was great too, but it's so much more. It's a well-proven business model in all kinds of industries, as we know. So finally, I'll just share one final thought on platform cooperatives, as we know, and I'll say that I don't personally have any direct experience with them, although I have, spoken to folks who are involved at Allied Up and been very excited about the emergence of that platform co-op, and also another staffing co-op in California called Turning Basin Labs. But we know that co-ops are businesses or organizations formed by people to meet their common needs, and that democracy happens by people engaging civically, or engaging with the other people in their democratic organization. And I think with platform cooperatives, I imagine that we see the challenge of people the members not knowing each other, for example. And that's going to naturally be the case as we move to scale. And that's one of the reasons why platform co-ops are so incredibly important, because they can bring the cooperative model to millions more people than a lot of the other forms of on-the-ground worker co-ops are going to be able to do. And I think that the reference to online voting technologies and things like that, I think were really interesting. And I think COVID has taught us what we already knew to some degree in Project Equity, because we had done co-op development using Zoom and remote technology for many years. But there are ways that we can create human-to-human contact and create democratic processes across technology, but they have to be really deliberately fostered. So I think that'll be one of the exciting challenges as the platform cooperative economy grows, is to find new ways of co-op development to encourage democracy across platforms. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Hilary. Now I'd like to hand this over to Dr. P.V. Unnikrishnan to respond.
I hope I am audible. I'm extremely happy to be invited to this consultation organized by the Berggruen Institute on building cooperative ownership in the digital economy. And it's the right time for us to get into such a dialogue, especially in the context of COVID, where we are becoming more and more clear that the ills of the digital platform economy have become much more evident. I would limit myself to basically some remarks on Kerala and also on some general remarks about the platform cooperative policy positions which have been indicated. Now, the case studies are very revealing, which covers California, Kerala, Italy, then Barcelona, Berlin, and also Preston, UK. They have been appropriately chosen. And Kerala, which is a relatively unknown location, a small state at the southern tip of India. In fact, the authors have highlighted a number of things about why Kerala has been selected, because it's one of the places where the cooperative density is high. But there are a number of other aspects about Kerala, probably which are left known. Kerala had the first elected communist government in the world. Kerala has the largest governmental open source and free software facility in the world. Kerala is a place where the largest women empowerment project, Kudumbashree, runs. A state which has declared internet as a basic human right in November 2019, and which is planning to provide high-speed internet to all the citizens with a subsidy for the lesser privileged. The state which has the highest literacy and the lowest percentage of the population being affected by multidimensionality or poverty in the country, and also a state which is one of the best local government systems in the world. So I'm extremely happy that I represent the government of Kerala, which has taken a policy decision to bring platform cooperatives to a central stage of its campaign in transitioning to the Kerala knowledge, to a knowledge society, and also in developing a model for social security systems for gig workers in the state, looking at similar models across the world. So we are in the process of looking forward to a partnership in developing a platform cooperative movement. And I hope that this consultation would take us substantively further in this initiative. We have already declared that we will be bringing out 4,000 platform cooperatives in the 5 years as a part of the strategy, as Professor Scholz was indicating. We have also made an effort to take platform cooperatives as a central point of discussion in our innovation democratization exercise, which we have opened to colleges and schools, where we have added a new theme, innovation collectives and platform cooperatives. All the takeaways which have been pointed out by the authors in the paper, especially relating to autonomy of the cooperatives, the startup funding, the preferential venture fund treatment, updation of the Cooperative Act 1999, and working towards a beacon of a cooperative digital economy, establishing a platform cooperative summit, and creating a platform cooperative investment funds. Almost all these components are sort of initiated as sort of initiatives as a part of the strategy document that we have approved at the government level. So I think that we would be able to make a considerable headway in terms of building platform cooperative movement in the state. I think that the major initiatives which require international attention is, one, the question of seed funding, the mechanism of legal support, because the cooperative forms in different locations are widely different. We see the French model, which gives quite a lot of opportunities for external capital support to be mobilized, which does not exist in the Indian cooperative system. So these are all very interesting things which are emerging from the international mechanisms. There is also a requirement for looking at technical support, because this is one area where COPs are lacking. And I think that mechanisms for technical support are very critical. Local government partnership is a new thing which has come up in these discussions. I myself had been working with local government for quite some time, and I am exposed to the possibilities of local government working in the cooperative sector, but there are very few examples of cooperative partnership which have emerged in this part of the continent. The models which have come up on the local government partnership in California and in other locations would be very keen on looking at the partnership of the organized labor, the cooperative movement, and the local governments is definitely a major area where there has to be quite a lot of focus. The whole question of technological sovereignty and citizens' data ownership is extremely important. This is where I think the open source movement and the free software movement can have quite a lot of synergies with. And in the Kerala context, we find that this is a very important area which could be pursued. I would like to take the model of Barcelona, which had been working substantively on this particular area, into the platform cooperative model as a takeaway from this seminar. I am extremely happy for being invited to this seminar, and I would like to continue with the dialogue with the Platform Cooperative and these initiatives on taking this program forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Unnikrishnan. Now I'd like to hand this over to Councillor Brown for response.
Good afternoon. Matthew Brown here. I'm leader of Preston City Council. I also do some work for the Democracy Collaborative to promote community wealth building. Delighted to be here. I mean, I've read the report. It is pretty powerful about what it wants to achieve and all the barriers and opportunities which are in front of us across many countries in the world, really. And the examples of how these ideas are being implemented as well in various regions, cities, countries. Again, it's very inspiring. Yeah, I mean, in terms of where we are, I think this is a moment to try and move to what could be broadly be described as a more democratic economy, in the sense that, you know, across the world, we've had a very large economic crisis which affected most of the world from 2008 onwards, when there was a collapse of the worldwide financial system. We've then had austerity imposed on many communities, as well as other neoliberal policies, and obviously we've had the worst public health crisis since the Second World War, really, in many countries, and obviously that's really hit the less well-off countries a lot worse. So I think around the world, people really have a desire for change, and they don't want to see an economic system where the levels of inequalities continue at the rate they are. And we've seen how during the pandemic, it's those low-paid workers, often exploited by gig economy corporations, who often find ways of not paying the levels of tax which the law intends, who've been at the, you know, kind of like at the cutting edge of it, really. And often many of those workers are from minority communities of women, who generally tend to be less well off and less well paid. So obviously, any way we can try and tackle those inequalities is, you know, very, very positive. And I think, you know, it doesn't have to be this way with the digital economy. There's potential with it as well as threats. I mean, Amazon is a company, and the big corporations are obviously, I'd argue, quite extractive companies, but there's other ways in which we can potentially scale up alternatives and win popular support for them. So I think that's the way we got to try and go. Very pleased and quite honoured that the report does refer to Preston. Obviously, the work we've been doing within Preston in the north of England, and it's very cold here today. It's about 6 p.m. in the evening. So, but the work we have been doing in Preston, in the north of England, it's part of a community wealth building movement that's been growing in the UK and beyond. And what we've done is similar to American cities that inspired us. We've worked with all our big institutions. So the council has raised wages, and we've encouraged big institutions to raise wages. The council has procured a lot more goods and services locally. And again, we went to the university hospital. So we're talking a kind of entrepreneurial local state that we're trying to encourage here. Now, a big part of it is very common sense policies around hire local, buy local, invest local, you know, build affordable houses, raise wages, but we're now at the stage where we're really trying to democratise our economy. So we're currently establishing 10 new worker-owned businesses. So we've got 5 registered at different stages. Interestingly, there's a digital business in there, the Preston Digital Foundation, but there's also a platform cooperative called Northwest Black Cabs, which is the beginnings of our local taxi drivers who are currently self-employed, who are organising on an app as a worker-owned cooperative that's a platform cooperative. And because that's within the South Asian community, that has the potential to really expand to be quite a big business within Preston. And obviously the work we are doing at the moment with the Preston model, we've come to the conclusion some time back that we've really got to work with our communities, all our communities in Preston, to actually make sure they're aware of these alternatives. So as well, we've got a cooperative education centre that was referred to. Our trade unions have incubated have incubated that, and we also work with our university business school. And obviously when you work with unions, the community, religious organisations, community organisations, and the business community, especially smaller businesses, that's where you can really try and create a new economic model. But also we're very keen and are currently establishing a banking alternative, a regional cooperative bank across Preston, the county of Lancashire, and 2 other counties, because one of the obstacles and barriers within the UK is the fact that we don't have a banking system which is similar to Germany, which is mainly not for profit and has higher levels of cooperatives, because a big barrier to expanding these enterprises and the social economy in general is how the large banks behave. And again, that's linked back to the economic crash of 2007-8. We need to have cooperative banks that will support these kind of economies. So it's very exciting what we're trying to do at the moment, and obviously there is interest in looking at platform cooperatives, especially with our BME community, who want to look to alternatives to the delivery corporations, which often classify people as self-employed, so they find a way of avoiding the employment protections that most people are entitled to. So obviously the community wealth building movement, nobody heard of it within the United Kingdom, but we started this work in Preston about 8 years ago. But it's quite amazing how this has grown into many other places within the UK. So for example, Sheffield have launched an ownership hub, which is looking at conversions into employee and worker ownership, and platform co-ops are a part of that conversation as well. The City Council of Oxford is looking to double the size of its cooperative economy, and in places like Islington that are also supporting community wealth building, they've launched a cooperative called Wings actually in the last few months, which is an ethical food delivery business. So again, that is an alternative to the platform capitalists that you do see, and crucially it's the only, I believe, business of that type that pays the London living wage of at least £11 an hour. So there's something in the water here, that these conversations that were not being discussed are actually being discussed in many places, and this movement towards a democratic economy, it's really shaping and taking off within the UK, which is very exciting. The key question to all of this is whether we can actually bring it to scale, because there are barriers, but I think there's lots of community support locally and regionally for these alternatives. I mean, the recommendations are excellent around procurement, around the local public sector having a stake in cooperatives, around company law and other things. One of the barriers we have within the UK is that if you're a cooperative, for example, you don't get reductions and 0 business rates, whereas you do if you're a social enterprise or a charity. I think that needs to be looked at, because there's a big crossover with a lot of work and employee-owned businesses and the social enterprise sector in the UK. They often do very similar things, and I think that needs to be looked at in the UK as well. But a big thank you for the invite, and I did actually read the full report. It was quite inspiring. I just think we've all got to really focus on our minds and how we can bring this to scale, really, because inequality is still rising around the world, and that is something which I think is unsustainable. And I think if inequalities continue to rise at the rate they are, there's a real question about democracy, because there's an argument, can you have a truly democratic country or political system if the wealthy manage to lobby and influence politicians that much because they are that rich? And I think one of the ways around that is to look at how we can actually share these new models of ownership and make sure people understand them and have support for them, because the biggest challenge we're facing in Preston and other places is that people are conditioned to think that they can't actually self-organise in a democratic business and share the rewards and have a stake over their own economic destinies. And that is something people have been conditioned to believe in, but it can be overcome if we actually educate people about these policies. And just finally, very excitedly, in the UK, one of our major unions is Communication Workers Union is getting behind community wealth building, and cities like Preston that are supporting these policies. So they're going to put quite a bit of industrial muscle behind a lot of these alternative models. So Trevor and colleagues, thank you so much for the invite, and look forward to hearing the rest of the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Brown, and thank you to all our respondents for their illuminating comments. I'd now like to invite Hal Plotkin to take the floor to respond with any comments or questions.
Thank you very much, Layla. And what a pleasure it is to hear this conversation unfold and to see this report published, and to congratulate my co-authors, starting with Professor Scholz, who was among the first, if not the first, scholars in the United States to identify this issue and this possibility at the earliest stages of the development of these commercial platforms, and saw the opportunity to bring together alternative forms of organization. And also to salute Jonas and Morshed. I've earned every one of these white hairs, and it's so delightful to see young scholars turning their attention to issues of the intersection between platforms and cooperatives, technology and cooperatives, which is so ripe for study, for academic work, and for research, and which is so neglected by our academic structure here in the United States and even around the world. I served in the Obama administration as a senior policy advisor in the Department of Education. In that context, after leaving office, I did a little search myself to try and find graduate schools of business that focused on the critical research questions that are important to move a shared ownership and cooperative management using technology. As our respondent, Ms. Abell, so articulately pointed out, the affordances of technology are uniquely suited to address some of the issues that are related to cooperative management, involvement, and inclusion. And yet we have very little work, almost no work. Instead, what we see in our American business schools is an almost universal focus on the winner-take-all system of capitalism, which, as Councillor Brown points out, is deeply hostile to the very idea of democracy itself. And so I just want to use my 90 seconds here to take a step back and to put this into a broader context. And that is to, while these policy recommendations and the idea of platform cooperatives is often viewed as a kind of futuristic development, in some sense, it's really returning, at least in the American, in the US context, to a more traditional set of values, where the government, where people, citizens and elected representatives acknowledge that the government, our government, had a responsibility to all of our citizens, not just to the owners of capital. That's why we have a National Labor Relations Board. It's why organized labor prospered in the pre-digital era. And all of those rules, those social norms, those practices were literally thrown out the window as digital technologies, which often resembled magic, began to catch on. And I'm speaking to you today here from the heart of Silicon Valley in Palo Alto, where I feel like I owe you and the world an apology, because Silicon Valley, with the help of many reporters like myself, and that was my original background as a technology reporter here in Palo Alto, sold the country on the notion that we had to abandon virtually every element of social progress related to labor relations in order to enable the experimentation that was deemed necessary so that these magic boxes could proliferate in our lives and we could benefit from software and digital technology. And of course, that was the craftiest lie that capital ever foisted on labor and the general economy, as we've seen the rollback of so much social progress that enabled shared prosperity as a fundamental tenet of democratic societies. And we've seen the effect of that now in a media system here in the US that has been paralyzed now by lawless behavior that's been codified into law, where our government is now incapable, for example, of preventing the spread of Nazi propaganda on major media outlets through social media that would have been unthinkable in a more sensibly regulated media market. We're unable to prevent the destructive spread of racist and anti-women, misogynistic trash that is now a feature of the liberties that the technology industry insisted that had to be uniquely afforded to them. And what we're seeing now, and I think the platform cooperative movement is a reflection of that, is not so much an advance into the future, or at least equally a return to an insistence that the values that our parents and grandparents and their grandparents fought for the development of humane laws that treated labor with dignity and respect. And that's going to take a concerted effort, as has been identified by our respondents, that's now occurring around the world. And as a policymaker, I can say that I see the makings of the progress. I forget who it was that said that progress sometimes happens slowly and then all at once. And we're in the slowly point right now, but I think we'll see a very rapid progression to platform cooperatives in short order as these specific policy initiatives are better understood and are implemented, precisely because they're popular with the public. One data point that needs to be really focused on here is the early marketing data that we've seen, market research data that we've seen from the customers of platform cooperatives. And what the customers are telling us, 70, 80% of them, is that they prefer knowing that the money they spend for a good or a service goes to the person who actually provides the good or the service. That is a point of differentiation, that customers prefer to know that the person that delivers their food gets the money that they spend for the food delivery service. And that's a point of differentiation that the more extractive business models cannot compete with. There's simply no competition. And so that's an untapped market that's ready to be developed, that's literally globally in the trillions of dollars. And we know it's what the customers are looking for. So to return to Trebor's opening comments, that's why it's essential that we modernize the regulatory approach, the legal approach, and the academic approach to these issues so that we can further develop the platform cooperative model to provide the customers with what they're looking for and to provide workers with a return to the stability that's essential to the workings and the preservation of our democratic systems. So let me stop there. I wanted to highlight the threads that I think pull all of these comments together, and particularly to highlight the connection between platform cooperatives and restoring the popular appetite for democracy by proving that democracy can still deliver the goods for the citizens who live within them. Leila, thank you very much for these few moments to respond.
Thank you, Hal. Now I'd like to pivot to Q&A. Our first question coming in from the YouTube chat is from Soman. In India, one could argue that the co-op movement has suffered from excessive government control. Ownership usually involves the right to some degree of control. Where would one find the balance? Would anyone like to respond?
I'm happy to jump in. It's such a key question. And I've made cooperative development my passion and my life's work because I believe in democratizing ownership of enterprises. But I am also sometimes a voice toward, I'm generally advocating for a low bar of membership and ability to participate with a vote. But in some situations, I advocate for a slightly higher bar, because when you're part of an enterprise, when you co-own an enterprise that you work in, you have a vote equal to everybody else. And it's really important that I think the answer to this question is going to be different for every enterprise. And that's part of co-op design, which is part of co-op development, and really thinking these things through. What's appropriate for our enterprise and why? So yeah, I don't think there's one generic answer to that, but I do, when I'm working with folks on structuring cooperatives, I do encourage them to think about what level of involvement do you want an individual to have? And in worker co-ops, it's often how many hours a week are they working, or how many hours have they worked total before they become a member? But those are really important decisions, and it's important to think about that trade-off and the nature of each business in making that decision. But I'm sure others have interesting perspectives on this that may be different.
If I might just add about that particular point, I think coming from an academic as well as a Global South perspective, I can completely see the sensitivities that this sort of an issue can raise. I think a lot of it is about how to design a legal framework which is able to allow for cooperative autonomy, while at the same time enabling the involvement of local authorities in a non-controlling manner, as Trebor described. And I believe it is possible to strike this balance, and it is important to strike this balance, especially if platform cooperatives expand into sectors where they are fulfilling functions that are often, let's say, semi-public in nature. And if we see the sort of broader scope of how this has happened in the past, the state usually does have some rights in this, and we think that we don't want to completely erode those either.
Thank you, Morshad and Hilary. I will now move on to the second question, which is from Domingo Jimenez. As the worker-owned platform co-op economic model scales, do you envision an ecosystem where competition between co-ops will or should happen locally or globally? I think this is a great question for Trebor and Jonas. Trebor, would you like to respond?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. And I think it gets a chance also to say that this is not about some magic, cooperative solutionism, right? So if there's ever a problem, throw a co-op at it, because co-ops are not the answer to everything, right? So I heard one person once compare them to an IKEA tool, right? They are very good at what they're good at, right? So they are a good response to very particular problems. But I think, like, for various problems in society, like you need different sizes and different business forms, right? So that's why I think a pluralistic commonwealth, right, is something that I would support, where you have a network of autonomous, independently working, but interconnected cooperatives next to small unionized private businesses, next to ESOPs, right, employee-owned companies, all as part of a greater commonwealth. And of course, some of these already exist, right? Like in Cleveland, you can look at Corporation Jackson and others, where you have these sort of glimpses of these little commonwealths. And of course, there's a history of the Knights of Labor in the 1880s and the Co-op Party, and we don't have time for all of that history, but there's of course a lot of precedents for that. So, but maybe Jonas wants to add a European 2 cents to that as well.
Yeah, maybe just to briefly expand on it with a concrete example here from Berlin, where we actually saw competition between platform co-ops for a couple of months at least. So in 2019, in the summer, Deliveroo left the German market, and all of a sudden there was a lot of enthusiasm for building new platform co-ops that would replace Deliveroo, and we had two emerging at the same time. So one is now called Cora, and the other one back then was called the Food Fairies, and both of them created also linkages with other platform co-ops internationally. So Cora jumped on the wagon of Co-op Cycle, which comes from France, and the food fairies worked more closely with Mensakas from Spain. And that was perfectly fine, because obviously we want more opportunity and more options with these platform co-ops. So in the long term, one of these did not survive, but so it was even better that there were two, because that allowed for one to survive and to kind of consolidate also the workers from the other co-op into it. So I think, honestly, in a way, the more the merrier, and it didn't necessarily hurt the platform co-op ecosystem that we have had this competition, if you want to call it that, for this period.
Great, thank you, Trevor and Jonas. This third question is coming in from Roberto Hinestroza. Please, can you share some thoughts about what conditions were present in Kerala and Preston communities that allow what is happening? I think this is a question most appropriate for Councillor Brown and PV Unnikrishnan. Councillor Brown, would you like to respond first?
Yeah, definitely. Obviously, the work in Preston required some political leadership, which came with my colleagues and myself, who thought, well, you know, we needed to try and change the system locally. What did help in Preston, which wasn't seen as help at the time, is that for over a decade, until we adopted the Preston model, we've been working towards a quite large regeneration scheme that involved inward investment, and it would have been in today's money over £1 billion, with very large global developers. And we tried for over a decade to secure that inward investment into our community, and that kind of like was abandoned in 2011. At the same time, we had the economic crisis, you know, a few years after that. So within Preston, we had a dynamic where my party took over the leadership 10 years ago. We had the failure of a big regeneration scheme, private sector led. We also had austerity, so the amount the public sector has to spend is being cut back year after year. So all those things put together really slightly convinced us we've got to try and do something very different. And we thought we want to have more democratic control of the resources of the local economy in the hands of the people. So obviously there's a number of strategies we're implementing, but crucially cooperative ownership is one of our favourites, because we're very inspired by the work of places like obviously Trebor, but also, you know, Emilia Romagna, Mondragon. You know, when they actually bring it to scale at that level, you can see how you really have healthy, more participatory communities. And obviously we won't get that far, but even if we get, you know, a quarter of the way there in Preston, it will have a huge impact on people's lives and improve the city more generally. Thank you.
Dr. Unnikrishnan, would you like to respond?
Yeah. Can you hear me? Yeah, Kerala had been one location where there had been quite a lot of public action and also grassroots level movements. The condition which the present situation which is conducive to platform cooperatives has been created by the People's Plan movement, which has basically been a local level decentralized process, which has strengthened the process of decentralization, which has brought in quite a lot of grassroots movements up, including the organization called Kudumbashree. There is also a tradition of the cooperative movement. The traditional cooperative movement is also fairly strong, as the paper has pointed out in terms of the density of the cooperative movements elsewhere. Then the gig economy model is only coming up in a small way in Kerala as of now, and in the rest of the country, the gig economy movement is the issues relating to the gig economy movement is not as widespread as it is well known in the developed industrial countries. We are at the onset of the gig economy. The gig economy is only coping up. So this gives us an opportunity for us to actually move into look at possibilities of extending social security to address some of the pitfalls of the gig economy and to provide more social security to the gig workers. This is also emerging as a sort of an opportunity for the Kerala conditions.
Thank you, Dr. Unnikrishnan. Does anyone else have any final points they'd like to make before we wrap up?
I'm happy to jump in with one comment broadly on policy victories and how they go hand in hand with cooperative work on the ground. One of the issues made in the paper was a very common challenge for cooperatives, where in financing programs, there's an expectation of what we call in the United States an individual guarantee. So every member of the cooperative is expected to personally guarantee a loan, for example. That's just not necessary, not viable. It's a huge barrier. And it's one that has been fought in the US for decades. And even when the Main Street Employee Ownership Act required the Small Business Administration to do more lending to cooperatives, they still were unwilling to remove that requirement for co-ops. But there now is a pilot project for the SBA that will likely be passed as part of the Build Back Better bill that would waive individual and entity guarantees. So that's one example of where it takes a long time sometimes to get to these victories, even to remove the obvious barriers that are unnecessary. But once that barrier is removed, we will still have the challenge of, quote unquote, deal flow. Are there enough cooperatives coming to the Small Business Administration for loans? So one of the responses we get from policymakers and government agents at this point is like, well, sure, I love co-ops, I love employee ownership, but where's the beef? Where are the businesses coming and needing these services? So I just wanted to say that as we think about policy victories, let's also think about how we mobilize the whole ecosystem and how we get all the actors, or as many as possible, to work together to make sure that when a policy opening happens, it is also met with cooperative development on the ground, the cooperative entrepreneurs, and the other factors that can make it successful. And this is particularly relevant, I think, in the case of procurement, because one of the challenges is in a best case scenario where we got procurement preferences passed in some places, this will not be true in others, but we may not have cooperatives ready to provide the goods and services that the governments need. And we also wouldn't want that new procurement preference to become contradictory or counteractive to other procurement preferences, like in the US for minority and women-owned businesses. So there's a lot of just kind of tactical on-the-ground work that I'm sure differs in each location that needs to be done as we prioritize which policies we want to push and figure out how does the policy help to drive the action on the ground, and how does the action on the ground help to make a policy successful. Thanks again for the time in the session today. It's been terrific.
And if I could just quickly add to amplify those wise comments, that one of the goals of this paper is to really emphasize what's happening at the local level across a wide variety of regions. And there's a reason for that, which is that the forces of capital that have successfully rolled back decades of labor protections and policy are extraordinarily effective at the federal level. And they can paralyze the progress that we need to see. But what this paper does is it opens up opportunities for progress at the local level. And that's for anybody who's viewing this now or the archive in the future, the real encouragement here is to take action where you are with what you have, and to do what you can following the models that are outlined in this paper. If the people lead, the leaders will follow. And when we see these co-ops developed and supportive policies for these co-ops developed at 1,000 municipalities around the world, and then 10,000, the state apparatuses, the federal apparatuses will have no choice but to adapt. And so that's the encouragement that we hope that this paper provides, is to provide some ideas, some tools, some strategies for people at the local level to approach their city council, their town council, with specific ideas that can generate business for startup platform cooperatives that then can meet the allied forces that may emerge from other jurisdictions and locations. Don't wait for your federal policymakers to act. Make them act by moving where you are to support platform cooperatives. Thank you so much to our respondents for looking at our paper, and thank you to my co-authors for giving me the opportunity to participate.
Thank you, Hal. I wanted to give a moment to Trebor to wrap up. Trebor, would you like to make any final comments?
Well, I mean, this has been a global focus, right? For this paper, we looked at all these, had sort of this perspective on various countries. And I think that's important because there's so much waste and replication if people don't work together, if they don't coordinate, if they don't engage with each other. And that's why the Platform Cooperativism Consortium has started an apex organization, a global apex for platform cooperatives and co-op adjacent organizations to bring those together and work together on more policy proposals, to work on technology, to have sectorial exchanges, and so on. So I think that's an important last note, the urgent need to coordinate and work together, also when it comes to policy. Thanks so much to everybody. You've been all fantastic.
Thanks, Trebor. And with that, I think we've approached the end of our time, unfortunately. I just wanted to thank our audience for joining us today. And apologies to anyone who asked questions that we unfortunately did not have time for. You're always welcome to reach out to Berggruen or Platform Cooperativism Consortium directly. I also would like to draw the audience's attention to the links mentioned throughout the discussion from PCC, the co-authors, and Project Equity. Please check them out if you want to learn more. And if you like this panel, please feel free to circulate and to check out Berggruen Institute and PCC's other content. I would also love to thank all of our respondents and our co-authors for being excellent interlocutors today and for taking the time to have this conversation with us, which has been really wonderful and enlightening. We'll see you next time. Thank you.